Hello, Elizabeth and Ted.
Hi.
Hi. It's January 2nd, 2025. It's a Thursday, and we are going to record this conversation among the three of us. I'm Jennie Brier. I am a historian, and I've written about AIDS for now a long time. I think maybe 30 years, which seems sort of hard to believe. Um, and I'm excited to interview Ted and Elizabeth about their project called I, of course, was livid. Um, Elizabeth, maybe you'll introduce yourself first, and then Ted, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the thick of things.
Sure. My name's Elizabeth Koch. I live in New York City, where I work in brand marketing for a large HIV organization called Housing Works, which I've been for the past 10 years. Housing Works was founded in 1990 as the Housing Committee of ACT UP and is now a huge service agency, an advocacy agency in New York with clinics and housing and a suite of social enterprises that fund the work. And I also am a writer and performer. I have studied a lot of acting and uh, and enjoy performance. And I am an activist, an organizer, and part of What Would an HIV Doula Do collective.
Yeah, that's a nice place for me to start. I'm also a member of What Would an HIV Doula Do? And yeah, I say that I'm a writer and an organizer, and my work is primarily in HIV/AIDS and community and collaboration. And I started doing that work where I was born in Edmonton, Alberta, and now I do it primarily in New York and St. Louis. I'm the co-author of a book called We're Having This Conversation Now with Alexandra Uaz, and I adjunct teach at the New School and Manhattan University.
I too am a member of What Would an HIV Doula Do? And Elizabeth, I don't know if I've told you this, but my mom was the chair of the board of Housing Works for a long
Oh,
time.
wow. I did not know that. Amazing.
Um, so we all know each other, and we've done some work together, and we've also Elizabeth and Ted have done some quite special AIDS memory work together. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, before we even talk about the specifics of the project, if you could tell me a little bit about, you're very much working on HIV AIDS in the present, but you also both have strong connections to understanding its complex pasts and it's also its futures. Can you talk a little bit about what AIDS and memory means to you when you think about memory in relationship to even just your current work?
Such a good question. Um, well, in my current work, in my current job, which is also my work, I am, yeah. There's a the an as an organization, Housing Works is 30 years old, 35 years old this year. Um, and so much of how we work and how we respond to crisis is so informed by those early days. And it's, I feel like I'm living and working with memory all the time. It's like the way that the organization springs into action, the way that my work is responding and engaging with that history is something that is always happening all the time. Um, in my personal life, which is not necessarily separate from my work life, but there is somewhat of a distinction. You know, it's not just I'm not just coming to this because of that job. I came to the job because of who I am. Um, uh, uh, I live in the East Village, Lower East Side of New York, and it's a place that I like. It feels haunted with the loss of so many people. Um, my partner runs a bar that is a long operating bar that has a queer history, and yeah, memory is it's yeah, it's so the lives of all those people that I never knew are so present in my everyday. And I have a lot of friends who are I'm about to be 40, and my so in 1990 I was in kindergarten, um, but my I have close friends that are older than me, and AIDS memory is just it's part of our life. It's part of every day.
Yeah. I teach a class at the new school called Life During Memorialization, and I started that class more than 5 years ago now because I'm interested in this space that AIDS takes up as one of the very few things that gets memorialized while it's still ongoing. You know, most memorializations, like a war or some catastrophe, is something that you can point to as being specific and over. And AIDS is different in that way. This is also happening at a time where our idea of what a memorial is changing, and what a catastrophe is broadening. So I just wanted to name that. Also, that book I mentioned earlier, Alex and I tried to think about memory and provide some framework around how to put memory in order or time in order. And I'm really interested, obviously, in 20th century AIDS, but if I could only focus on one period, I would focus on like the year 2000 to now, because I think that's an understudied, rich period. And the thing that I'm starting to get more and more interested in is I don't think history is ever an impediment to progress, but I do think there's ways in which, especially within the AIDS response and even us as AIDS workers, there's a way that we can use AIDS that I do think impedes us from progressing. And I'm interested in that.
That's really fascinating. The combination of those two answers in relationship to one another. I wonder, there's a way in which um, sort of like uh, remembering things that you didn't necessarily yourself live through, but that still the trace of them are still around you. And that then this idea of history hindering progress, such an important concept, because there's that trite saying, if we don't know the history, we're doomed to repeat it. But there is also a sense that the fact that we talk about a progress narrative blinds us or keeps us from seeing these other ways of relating to one another that pre-exist, that actually disintegrated over time. And that is definitely true. I think in the East Village, there's a path through parts of the East Village that for me are very much about that time before, what it was like in the 80s to grow up there. Um, well, so I mean, there's a lot that probably brought you to this project. Um, can you tell me some of the origins of it? Like, how did you two even, I mean, I have so many questions, like, what is it? It's about, maybe tell us something about about the piece, and then we can
Elizabeth,
talk about how you got started with it. But it is such an incredible story.
Well, Elizabeth, what's your favorite description that you've ever heard of I, of course, was livid, which is the performance piece we're talking about or the play that we're talking about?
Um, well, I think describing it as documentary theater is accurate.
Hmm.
So I mean, Ted was doing, and Ted, interrupt me if I'm getting this history wrong, research in the One archives and in anticipation of a show that you were helping to curate. Is that right? And uh, we had also just both seen some documentary theater that we were really inspired by. We saw the off Broadway, was it Broadway at that point? Anyway, it was a New York City theater production of Is This a Room, which was the reality winner interrogation uh, piece that is brilliant. And now there's a film, and I think you can watch on HBO. Um, and we had just been in conversation about that, and as Ted was digging through the archives, found these transcripts from this hearing, and uh, with that fresh in our minds, the idea of putting that on stage came to Ted, and Ted came to me, and knowing that I have a interest in theater, uh, and so we gave ourselves the challenge of seeing if we could shape what was there into something that could be used to communicate and educate about this part of AIDS history, um, and used as a tool, educational tool, but also one that is, emotionally compelling and inspiring because it's live and enacted.
Yeah, exactly that. There's this gift that, so it's a transcript of
Hmm.
women testifying in front of the CDC about the need to change the definition of AIDS, which before 1993 was not inclusive, which actually excluded people based on what opportunistic infections they had or didn't have, and all these complicated things. And Nancy McNeil, who is one of the women who was present that day, um, created a transcript of that event in which her lover, Mary Lucy, spoke, Wendy Alexis Modesty spoke, CDC spokespeople spoke. And so to find this gift of the transcript after seeing the reality winner play was kind of kismet. And I think maybe if we have time today, Elizabeth and I can talk about how maybe that initial play has kept us a little stuck, but also provided such a good framework. And so, yeah, like Elizabeth said, we used that transcript to try to create something live. And because of Elizabeth's performance and writing background, and because of her deep connection to what works in terms of messaging around HIV/AIDS, we were able to dive into that script and make it something that's performable. It's always been, at least my desire, I won't speak for you quite yet, Elizabeth, or maybe I will never speak for you, that you know, I don't have any goals that this should be on Broadway. My daydream is that this is something that can be downloaded and performed in community centers and schools. And I think that script is getting closer and closer. We should say, and I'm going to read here for a second, we should say that the play is augmented by additional information. So the two biggest sources, besides the transcript itself, which has been edited down, but not changed that much. We added some information from a book called Lessons from the Damned, Queers, Whores, and Junkies Respond to AIDS by Nancy E. Stoller. And then, of course, Women, the AIDS Crisis, and the Center for Disease Control by Maxine Wolf. And then there's editing by Elizabeth and I.
Hmm. It's such a, I think it's important to maybe say before we talk more about the play itself, just a little bit about the change of the definition, um, organizing campaign, and the fact that this play is about, not entirely, but it is about women who have, I mean, it's about lesbians and AIDS. It's a play that is about a particular moment in the women's history of AIDS, obviously one that I'm really interested in. And I think most people, if they know anything about the women's history of HIV, have heard the phrase change the definition. But I don't think that they know necessarily how, maybe they know this, but what the play, I think for me, you really see is how central women living with HIV were to all of this work. Like they put their bodies on the line to have these things change, and um, they really insisted that healthcare providers and the biomedical establishment recognized that women had bodies that were different than men or the universal subject. So maybe the other question is, how did you get interested in thinking about the women's history and of HIV and AIDS and the memorialization of that? Like that's even more specific kind of question, but I am curious, like how you came to that work.
Elizabeth, can I be bad for a second? Jenny, I would love to know. Well, I don't. Is this a memorial project? I don't know. I don't know, Elizabeth. Do you think of it as a memorial project? And
I
Jenny,
don't
do you? And if you do, I'd love to hear how.
I don't think of it as a memorial project, but I do think that it's a project about memory, and I think it's a historical project.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think it's about exactly what, for me, what I understand about the Change the Definition campaign was about changing the narratives that we associate with AIDS. Um, Change the Definition was about changing the way that people were diagnosed. It was about changing the federal regulations so that women could qualify for Social Security. It was about, and of course, what it did was also make it possible for people who were injection drug users for their bodies to be recognized as having, right, that it wasn't just PCP or something like that, or KS. Um, so I don't know. I mean, the women's history of AIDS is not one. I mean, between the three of us, we're probably like on the top of the list of people who think about this. So how did you come to even focus on it in the first place?
Well, um, I can speak for myself and
Yeah,
that I
please.
think, even in finding the transcript, I think there's probably an answer to what brought you to even to be looking where you were looking. But um, the I think that personally, I have learned the most from Valerie Reyes Jimenez, like like not even just in terms of like AIDS history and activism, in terms of life, in terms of like how to be in the world. And she is someone who is a long-term survivor, who was a young mother who was diagnosed. Her husband died. She raised these kids. She um, the way she talks about her life and how she, didn't expect to live as long as she uh, has and is, still, with us and doing the good work today. Uh, and and also I guess I mean that she's my first point of
Mhm.
contact, but then also the all the AIDS activists that I'm close with who are veteran AIDS activists are all women. I mean, it was the lesbians who were, caretaking um and advocating, and those are those are my people. And so that's what interests me and brought me there.
Yeah. Valerie is pretty amazing. I hope that they are able to post a link to the performance with her in it next to this so that people can watch both. Yeah.
Yeah, Elizabeth's correct in saying that I was happily digging through the archives at one, working on metanoia, transformation through AIDS, archives and activism. And that was a show that was co-curated by other members of What Would an HIV Doula Do, aforementioned Alex, Kat Chairs, and Jawanza Williams. And Kat said early on, and we all agreed that if we were going to do an exhibition about HIV/AIDS activism, it couldn't be something that we'd seen before, and it had to be about the people and things that we were central to who and what we cared about. And we agreed that it should be Black women. This was not far after the beginning of Black Lives Matter, not far after Me Too. So yes, there was cultural stuff in the air, but also all four of us carry that with us in our ethics and in our body. Kat is a Black woman. Juanze is a young Black man living with HIV. Alex is a feminist who has been doing HIV work for a long time. So it's something we're all committed to. And Kat said we should look, if we wanted to find Black women in the archives connected to HIV, we should probably think about the role that jail and prison played. And that makes sense. And then it's like less than a jump, and you find Katrina Haslip. And Katrina Haslip obviously essential to the story of women and the change the definition. And so all of that brings me to that work. And also the work bring what I hope for the play is that it brings people to different ways to activate history. So the play, the transcript is the chunk in the middle, but it's bookended by voices of the present. And the play, every time it gets performed, whether it's online or in person, we have a different voice of the present, and they add a new monologue that is rooted in the present day experience of HIV/AIDS. And maybe this is a way to play homage to the women that came before, or maybe it's a way to say that history is not just what's in the past 20, 30, 40 years ago, but it's what happened a minute ago and it's what's happening right now. And so the transcript is an archive, but then we've also been keeping all these monologues. So now we have, 4 years of monologues from JD, from Crichton Baxter, from other people. And so I'm also interested in how we're extending what it means to create an archive through performance.
How many times has it been performed?
At least three. Well, we did the first one was at the Housing Works bookstore right before COVID. And then we did it again live at Issue Project Room, and then again at WNYC in February of this year. And then it's been performed at least 3 times for my class.
Oh, great. That's terrific. So, what are some of your, I mean, you've talked about it to some extent, but what are the parts of the project that make you the most proud? Is it the parts that, and the repetition of it is quite wonderful and profound. What makes you proud about it, or what do you love about it?
I I love hearing the voices of those women. And um and yeah, I mean we just talked about how it's not a memorial project, but or maybe we don't know what a memorial is, but and we're still figuring it out. I think it's more like that. But you know, uh it is was profound. We got to have a really choppy uh technically challenged Zoom call with Nancy and Mary before the project, and um, it's really special that they're that we got to connect with them while they were still alive. They passed away over the course of this project, um, and that we're bringing their lives and words into this moment with us.
Mhm.
I feel I feel proud of that.
Mhm. They were
Yes.
long-term, just to give a little context, like long-term lovers, were members of ACT UP LA. Um, uh, one of them had been incarcerated, one had been, and they were, I didn't know how much you had connected with them before they passed away. But just to, if there's anything else you want to say about them, Ted, so that we have that here.
I mean, the thing that's been interesting as part of this process is, yeah, we had that phone call with them that was powerfully illuminating. That was when Keela Beja was also on the call with us because she was helping us with the WNYC performance. And it just was amazing to have multi-generational activists, multi-generational women living with HIV, multi-generational artists trying to navigate, 21st century technology. It was hilarious. And to see their love and relationship was amazing. And I would also say that I think we're on this journey where we're getting to know Mary and Nancy and Wendy and Carrie Duran, who briefly makes a cameo in the work, and Katrina Haslip through the archives. And each time we do it, I try to add a little bit more archival information for the actors and sometimes for the audience. So recently, before we read it in my class, we watched a little clip from Darian Taylor's Canadian TV show about women living with HIV. And Wendy, we got to hear and see Wendy talking from the 90s. And Eleanor Kipling, who's a member of What Would an HIV Doula Do, who often will play Wendy, was deeply moved, right? Like she has found her own relationship with Wendy, and now she has to think about it in relationship to the footage she saw. And with Nancy and Mary, we had that phone call, but then, I found some video and some activist tape from back in the day, and we get to see them goofing around in hotel rooms and acting up and there. What's the amazing writer out of Los Angeles who just published Bloodlines? Kiko. She writes really lovingly about them. So even though those three women are now no longer with us, we're still getting to know them. And the actors, I think, and Elizabeth, you can speak to this because you are not only co-writing, you're also acting. I feel like the actors are getting to know themselves in relationship to HIV and the women that they're portraying differently. So there's Joni Drago and Eleanor and Elizabeth and Valerie who've been recurring.
Right. I was saying in the interview that I did with Dan um, at the end of last year that, because the I'm Still Surviving project, I call it, it's called A Living Women's History, that I was sort of convinced that all of those women were always going to be alive. Um, and what that has meant, and that they were all part of this thing called A Living Women's History. And the testimony in some ways is also, it is a living women's history. And so in that respect, I understand what you mean, that it's not a memorial, but it is, but those women are not, well, Valerie is very much living, but the women in the in the hearing are no longer living. And so it is a way of knowing about their life, about what they were like when they lived. And that seems really important.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to say that it's not a memorial project. I had never thought of it and we'd never framed it that way. And
Yeah.
personally, and in my class, I do say that the best memorial is the action you undertake that was started by the people that came before you, that makes their life
Right,
worth living or keeps their legacy alive. So in many
right.
ways, of course, it's a memorial project, but I would love to think about how the script is one version of a memorial, but every time we perform it, it's a different. Oh, yeah. Every time we perform it, it's a different form of memorial.
Right.
Because we often have talkbacks. We often I mean, the one that we
Yes.
did for my class last month, Elizabeth, was really intense. Trump had just been elected again, and
Right.
people were in their feelings, and it wasn't necessarily about HIV, but it was about their bodies, their sexuality, death, and life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just held up a sticker that Ted gave me when I saw him last week that said this could be an AIDS memorial. So maybe that's the sticker. I mean, I think that's actually the part of it is that I think how memorial has been defined has been so confining. And it doesn't have to be something that is, I mean, there are lots of, it's a way of remembering and a way of feeling together. That seems to be
Mm.
what that play is. And that's really a memorial for me, I guess, in the best possible way. Um, you talked about some of the tech problems, and there's obviously uh and there but it seems like there are other challenges maybe for this ongoing project. This is not a one-time thing. So what are some of the challenges that you faced in realizing and continuing to realize this?
Hmm.
I know it's almost like we should do a swap analysis, like strengths, weakness, opportunities. Um, I mean, one of the challenges is like a deep commitment to it. We're both deeply committed to it. And I think it's safe to say we're not exactly sure what to do next. We know to keep performing it. We know every time we do it, it's meaningful. There's some talk of like, this should be touring. Like, we should be going on college campuses and doing this. It's such a meaningful way to engage people in um, American health history, in women's history, in activist history, in patient advocacy history, right? Like, there's just so much in there that could benefit anybody who sees it. And it feels delicate, and I want to be gentle and slow on purpose so we don't do anything wrong. Like, we got a very lovely email. I think it was an email from Maxine, just kind of making sure that we understood the totality. Like, you made a great point earlier, Jenny, about how it's so important that it's about the women's contribution. And if I remember what Maxine said correctly, it was also about like that there were thousands, if not millions, of people working on this project of changing the definition, and it was cross-cultural and cross-gender and cross the United States. And so it's like, how do we know that we are showing this vital but tiny moment, and that for the most part this might be the one time that someone gets to hear about women AIDS history. And so how do we both hold that we're being small on purpose, and we know we have to represent the magnitude of everything? That's really hard.
Hmm. I agree with that.
But I mean, I appreciate that. If you sort of read about or you listen to different oral histories about the change the definition, um, it was a major time when there were certainly men and women sort of allied together. It was the women's history of HIV is always a history that is about um, first Black women at the forefront. Um, and then, what something Elizabeth had said earlier, like this idea that the change of the definition protest or campaign, really more than a protest, obviously, um, changed the idea of what it meant to even think about lesbian and AIDS in the same sentence. There had been this assumption that lesbians were caretakers or caregivers and had been, the blood sisters of men. but part of what changed the definition was make it clear that there were women who had sex with women, women who made their lives with other women who were living with HIV in their body and dying from AIDS. And so it was a really incredible and important moment that really changed the course of history. It did. It changed the course of history. Women changed the course of this history. And it's true. You're just in one moment, but you're in a moment that is rich with pretty profound agency. And the fact that you've decided to weave the present, whether it's different long-term survivors or other people in the present, to it, like that does a kind of work that I think it just really is an incredible feat.
Wait, Jennie, what do you? Oh, sorry, Elizabeth. I have a question for Jennie, but you should talk first, Elizabeth.
Well, I guess I think about, yeah, it was an incredible moment. It was such a huge effort and had a major impact on the lives of women living with HIV. And also, like, we're not far from that moment now. Like, it's like, um, I think what I'm attracted to about the project and why I keep coming back to it now is like, what can we learn? What can we put into action? Like, as a female-bodied person, like, it's shocking and not surprising that like my body is still a fucking mystery to my doctors. Like, and the same with like trans bodies and anyone of reproductive age. Like, it's just like so wild that like this is like, yes, this was a moment, this was HIV, this was this piece of history, but like it's like we're in it now. Like there's so much that um we need to like learn from and mobilize around, like yeah, with regard to our own bodies. Like, and like the thing about like these women putting their bodies on the line, it's like actually like every body is on the line all the time. like like the medical institutions like are flawed, and research is flawed and biased, and like yeah, anyway, that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and I like what you said, Elizabeth, about in the play, women are putting themselves on the line. Wendy is talking about very intimate, painful things about her body, and she knows that, and she's bringing it to the nation, to the very people who will squirm, and it's their job to think about this, and they shouldn't be squirming. They should be giving her answers. And same with Mary, her mic is cut off, and it is where the play gets its power, and it's also something that happened to her. It was either an accident or an attempt to silence her, humiliate her, and like Elizabeth said, all of that is as painfully true in 2025 as it was back then. And that relates to my question to you, Jennie. And you can punt it if you don't want to hear it, but you've now talked to us, you've seen the play. What do you think we should do with it?
Huh. Well, I do love the idea. I mean, I think you should make sure that there's um, a sort of archival index of the pieces that you add to it. And I would definitely encourage you to have the One Archives collect it next to the original um,
It's in Judy
archival
Cisneros.
record.
Yeah, it's in Judy Cisneros' papers, Act Up Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they should definitely have it as a record of what their archive did. and what you did with their archive. Um, I don't know. I mean, I think we need, I mean, this is something I've been thinking a lot about, both in terms of the I'm Still Surviving project, but also the fact that there is really no sort of published women's history of HIV. And I think maybe it is something that comes in a lot of different forms. But I do think that it lives with a bunch of different things. So maybe it so there's a part of me that wants to see it kind of come into another form, which might be that you publish it as a piece with maybe a dialogue between the two of you, or something like this, not this interview, but another interview where you might contextualize it. I love the idea of creating an opportunity for people to do it in different places. Um, you know, there are a bunch of different kinds of live performances of scripts that, can be done in simultaneously, like on isn't like Women and Girls HIV Day, I think is in March. But something like that, where there's some kind of performance of it in 20 different places with 20 different long-term survivors, sort of being the MC. I mean, think of that as like the MC of the performance, the narrator of the whole thing. Um, I don't know. I think there are a lot of ways to do it, but it should be in various forms. Maybe that's the part about it being a memorial of the present as much as it is of the past.
What's clear to me, what's coming to me in this conversation, which I hadn't really thought of before, is I want to use it. Like, can we use it to teach
Yeah.
people how to deliver testimony?
Mm,
Oh, that's
mm.
interesting. That's really
Because we're going to
interesting.
need to be doing a lot of that.
Yeah.
So
And
good.
I think that's where we carry the spirit of these women to now is,
Yeah.
and that's how we memorialize them is here is testimony, and now what is your testimony that you need to uh, deliver before your city council, your elected
Right.
officials,
And
your
that's what's so powerful about the play, like that we'd never touched upon that exact suggestion of genius you just had, Elizabeth. And when we do try to make it into a teachable thing in these sessions, what happens is the play, it is powerful. Like every
Right.
time, like I forget how powerful it is, and we perform it,
Right.
and I'm exhausted for a few days. I don't perform it, I'm just there. But I'm exhausted for days after because it is so live.
Yeah.
These women so put their whole soul into it. So when we do a
Yeah.
percentage of it, it still comes up. And what happens is the conversation, we have to think of a device that allows people to hold the power of these women and know that that can channel through them, because out of respect, out of love, out of the need to process, they just want to talk about these women. And I think, Elizabeth, you're onto something. How do we invite them to actually see how crafting their testimony is a way to process what they're feeling?
Yeah. That's a really interesting idea. I have to take a quick pause. I'll be right back. Right. Here we are back again. Um, so that's an interesting idea, uh, to think about how to use the play to prepare for what's ahead. Um, and to really go back to what Ted said at the start, this idea that history can, like the power of that work can get lost if you think that we've moved, um, if we've been like on a sort of upward trajectory. There's something really different about that. Um, When you think about the audience, I mean, you've talked about your students, you've talked about doing the performance. Who was the 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 audience for the testimony was the CDC. Um, and you see that in the performance where they shut the mic off. But who was your first audience? Who were you making it for?
Um, well, like our yeah, I don't have the, I should have the answer. I mean, I think we were making it for our community, to remember this part of the story, and it coincided with the Love Positive Women campaign. The first reading was in February, um, during that campaign, which is a uh, a campaign started by Jessica, whose last name Ted will fill in for me.
Whitbread.
Whitbread, to show love towards women and femmes living with HIV during around Valentine's Day. But yeah, I think we were thinking about I was thinking about my community of fellow organizers, even like this was a part of the story that I knew about on a top level, but like to be in it and hear their words specifically was a different experience.
Yeah, to be a middle-aged organizer or activist as I am, it audience for me is often about bridging. So I think specifically about Malaya, who now is part of What Would an HIV Doula Do, but when we first performed this was just this cool person that I knew that was New York in the nonprofit world, young woman, young trans woman living with HIV, and by her own words was seeking community and history about the virus and the response to it that lives in her body. And after that first performance, we had a conversation between Malaya and Jennifer. And Jennifer, you know, is a little bit older than me. And so the audience, in a way, for me, was everything that Elizabeth said. And it was Malaya and Jennifer in the sense to learn from each other and teach each other. Um, like I think the thing that I struggle with about what to do next with the play is that it is so engagement heavy. So I have a hard time imagining like how do we turn that into something that we can just give to somebody? Like how do you download engagement? We have other projects in the Doula Collective that I think have done that to some degrees of success, but this one seems like you actually have to download Elizabeth and I to be there.
Well, it does sort of raise a question like you could do it by engaging, I mean, you could do it by engaging different long-term survivors and see how they wanted to have that live on.
Mm-hmm. It's also the ethics of performance. Like should or could anybody perform Wendy's monologue? That's a real question for us. Could or should anybody perform Mary's monologue? Could or should anyone perform Nancy's monologue? I
Yeah.
don't know. Those are big questions always, but in 2025, there's a
Yeah.
smarter and wiser audience who will have thoughts and feelings about that.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a complicated question about oral history. It's a complicated question about memorial, like who is being memorialized and for whom and in what way, and um, and maybe Elizabeth as a person trained in performance, um, you know, that I what it means to voice someone's words. I guess I wonder about that. Like I mean, you have a long history of doing of doing AIDS work and then also this performance piece. And so I'm wondering about the the marriage of those two for you.
Well, in this case, what makes it feel a little bit less complicated is that this was testimony that was
Right.
written to be delivered in public and to be put on the record, right? So
Yeah.
so there is kind of implied consent in that way, like this is a public testimony. So um uh having a reprise performance of that doesn't feel. I mean, I think it needs to be handled with care, and it needs to be all the things that Ted and I put into place to make people understand it and engage with it are important. But it doesn't feel as complicated to me
Right.
to share those words. Um, uh, I guess, yeah, it being an educational tool feels right. It being something about continuing the legacy of the energy and the organizing of these women feels right. So like making a polished, you know, longer length theater show with costumes and lighting cues, it's not what I'm interested in for this. I
Right.
think it's you know, that might be useful and in service of the project at some point, but I think it needs to be about like activating
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. That is a really, I think, important point. And maybe related to your idea about training people and how to do testimony. Um, there is something quite important about the fact that it was for the public record, and you see the way in which um, the record is like being controlled as it's happening.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so to get to see that and see that recreation of that moment of, I think for me as a historian, you sort of understand part of the testimony is what was written, right? They've written these notes to testify, and then you see the performance of it and it gets shut down, and there's this sort of amazing moment where you see how the archive is like the archive can't, like there's no way to really know that otherwise, and so you sort of see how the archive is incomplete, and the way that the performance recreates that, I think, is a really important part of what is getting remembered, so that it's not just, it's both the substance of their testimony, it's the comportment of their bodies, like her decision to come off the mic and still scream, basically. And when it's performed on stage, it's like, are we going to be able to hear it? No, we're not all going to be able to hear it, because that's actually what happened. You couldn't all hear it. Um, and then I think the idea of how that part of the story gets remembered then becomes a really important piece of it. So, I mean, you've talked about this some, but how, like, if you were, so we started our conversation this evening talking about this book, Everything for Everyone, this fictionalized oral history of New York in the middle of the 21st century, so 2052, 2072. What do you imagine this performance might mean in 25 years? Like, what would you want it to, how would you want it to be remembered?
Well, inspired by Elizabeth's ideas tonight, I want Mary and Wendy to be understood as profound teachers in the art of testimony, um, for all the causes that they were talking about, but actually, like, and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will echo that. And yeah, I want someone who experienced a reading or who encountered the work to um, have been inspired to write their own testimony, or to like stand up to activate and organize and find community. Yeah.
And inspired by that, let's also name that we want people to understand that we also need Nancy's. And Nancy is a witness from within. Nancy is someone who says, I see it all and I will record it and I will drag it forward. I will support you in other ways. And it's a reminder, and we know this, but it's a reminder that activism takes so many shapes and forms, and not everybody wants to or can be the loudest,
right,
and take up space. Some people are actually really like the Ella Bakers of the world. Like Nancy is participating in the Ella Baker School of Activism here. And so I also want that to be something that's remembered in 25 to 50 years.
yes, yeah, and the Judy Cisneros who held on to the paper. You know what I mean? Like all the pieces that are part of the story.
Oh, I think we just developed a curriculum, y'all.
Yeah, we did.
That's fucking great.
Cool. Yeah.
Well, I think that's probably a great place to end. I want to thank you both for being part of this conversation, and I really encourage people to watch I, of course, was livid, as performed by many people in whatever recording you can listen to or watch. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. That was really